The sound of her child's frightened cry tore through Sarah Mason's heart as she stood trembling on the auction block, the midday sun beating down mercilessly on her tear-streaked face. Clutching her 3-year-old daughter Emma to her chest, Sarah fought the overwhelming urge to run, knowing the chains around her ankles would only ensure a more brutal punishment. It was May 1867 in Willow Creek, a small but growing settlement in the Arizona Territory, and her late husband's deaths had led to this moment of ultimate humiliation being sold alongside the furniture and horses he'd left behind when typhoid claimed him 3 months prior. Next up, we have Mrs. Mason and her young one. The auctioneer called out, his voice carrying across the dusty town square where a crowd of curious onlookers and potential buyers had gathered. 2 for the price of 1. The woman's a fine cook and seamstress, and the child comes with her. Bidding starts at $50. Sarah's grip tightened around Emma, whose small face was buried against her mother's shoulder. She had promised her dying husband that she would keep their daughter safe, that they would stay together no matter what. But as the bidding began, that promise seemed impossible to keep. $50, called a man whose reputation as the owner of the local saloon made Sarah's stomach churn. $60, countered an older woman who ran the laundry service and was known to work her help until they collapsed from exhaustion. The bids continued to rise, each voice bringing Sarah closer to a future she couldn't bear to imagine. Her gaze darted desperately across the crowd, searching for any hint of compassion, any face that might offer salvation rather than servitude. That's when she saw him. Standing at the back of the crowd, tall and broad-shouldered beneath a worn leather duster, was a man whose eyes met hers with an intensity that made the world around them seem to fade. He wasn't bidding, just watching with a furrowed brow and a stillness that set him apart from the restless crowd. $90, shouted a gruff voice, belonging to the owner of the Silver Creek mine, a man known for separating mothers from their children to maximize productivity. Sarah felt her knees weaken. Her daughter would be sent to a separate household, perhaps never to be seen again. "Please," she whispered, though no one could hear her. "Please don't separate us." $120. The new voice cut through the square like a knife, silencing the crowd. The stranger from the back had stepped forward, his hand raised, his gaze never leaving Sarah's face. "Mr. Gabriel Reed enters the bidding," the auctioneer announced with surprise. "Do I hear 130? The mining owner hesitated, eyeing Gabriel with suspicion. 130, he finally countered. 200, Gabriel replied immediately, his voice calm but resolute. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The bid was unexpectedly high, especially for a woman with a young child in tow. The auctioneer looked almost gleeful. $200 from Mr. Reed. Do I hear more? The mining owner scowled, shook his head, and turned away. Going once. Going twice. Sold. To Mr. Gabriel Reed for $200. Sarah felt the world spinning around her. Sold. Like cattle. Like furniture. And yet, as her gaze locked with the stranger's with Gabriel's, she saw something that had been absent in every other face in the crowd. Kindness. As the auctioneer moved on to the next item, Gabriel approached the auction block. Up close, Sarah could see that his face, though weathered by sun and wind, was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30 years old. His eyes were a striking shade of green, and despite the gravity of the situation, they held a warmth that made her clutch Emma a little less desperately. "Madam," he said, his voice low as a clerk removed her ankle chains. "I'm Gabriel Reed. I have a ranch about 5 miles outside of town." Sarah swallowed hard, trying to find her voice. "What? What will you expect of us, Mr. Reed?" A flicker of understanding crossed his features. "Nothing improper, I assure you. I need help with the house, cooking, and such. The child, your daughter, she stays with you. Always." Something in his tone, a steadiness, an honesty made Sarah want to believe him, even as caution warned her against trust. "I have a wagon," Gabriel continued, gesturing toward the edge of the square where a sturdy wagon and 2 horses waited. "If you're ready, we can leave this place behind." Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. With Emma still held tightly in her arms, she followed Gabriel through the dispersing crowd, feeling the weight of stairs on her back. At the wagon, Gabriel offered his hand to help her climb aboard, but Sarah managed on her own, settling Emma beside her on the wooden bench. The little girl, exhausted from fear and confusion, leaned against her mother's side. Gabriel took his place beside them, picked up the reins, and with a gentle click of his tongue, set the horses in motion. They left Willow Creek behind, the dusty road stretching before them toward an uncertain future. "I'm sorry for what you've endured today," Gabriel said after they'd traveled in silence for some time. "No person should be sold like property." Sarah studied his profile, trying to understand this man who had spent $200 to purchase her and her daughter. "Why did you do it, Mr. Reed? Why spend so much?" Gabriel's hands tightened slightly on the reins. "I know what it means to be separated from family. I couldn't stand by and watch it happen if I could prevent it." The simplicity of his answer, the quiet conviction in his voice, touched something in Sarah that had been numb since her husband's death. "Thank you," she whispered, the words inadequate for the magnitude of what he had done. As the wagon rolled onward, the landscape opened up before them, rolling hills dotted with mesquite and saguaro, the distant mountains a hazy blue against the horizon. For the first time in months, Sarah felt a tiny spark of hope kindle within her chest. Emma stirred beside her, lifting her head to look around with curious eyes. "Mama, where are we going?" Sarah smoothed her daughter's tangled hair. "To a new home, sweetheart. To a new home." The Reed Ranch came into view as they crested a small rise in the road. It wasn't the largest property Sarah had seen, but it was well-maintained, a modest single-story house with a wide porch, a barn, corrals, and several outbuildings. A small garden plot beside the house showed signs of recent attention, and a windmill turned lazily in the afternoon breeze. "It's not much," Gabriel said, a hint of apology in his tone. "But the land is good, and the water's reliable. Been working it 5 years now." "It's lovely," Sarah replied honestly, struck by the peaceful atmosphere of the place. Gabriel pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and helped Sarah and Emma down. Up close, Sarah could see that the house, though simple, had been built with care. The porch railings were smooth and solid, the windows clean, the door painted a cheerful blue. "Come inside," Gabriel said, leading the way. "You must be tired and hungry." The interior was surprisingly clean for a bachelor's home, with sturdy, well-crafted furniture and a few touches that spoke of comfort rather than mere utility. A rocking chair by the fireplace, bookshelves filled with volumes, a braided rug on the plank floor. "The kitchen's through there," Gabriel explained, pointing. "My bedroom's at the back. I've prepared the spare room for you and your daughter." He hesitated. "I hope it will be suitable." Sarah followed him to a small but tidy room containing a bed, a chest of drawers, and a small table with a basin and pitcher. Fresh linens were folded at the foot of the bed. "This is more than suitable, Mr. Reed." "Thank you." Gabriel nodded, seeming almost embarrassed by her gratitude. "I'll let you get settled. There's water in the kitchen if you'd like to wash up. I need to tend to the horses, but I'll be back to start supper." After he left, Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, Emma curled up beside her. For the first time since the auction, she allowed herself to really breathe. They were safe, at least for now. The room was clean, there was a roof over their heads, and Gabriel Reed seemed to be a decent man. It wasn't the life she had envisioned, but it was far better than what might have been. "I like it here, Mama," Emma said softly, her small hand clutching Sarah's skirt. "The man has kind eyes." Sarah smiled, touched by her daughter's simple observation. "Yes, sweetheart, I believe he does." The next morning, Sarah woke at dawn, the habits of a farmer's wife deeply ingrained. She dressed quickly and roused Emma, helping her into one of the 2 dresses they had been allowed to bring with them. Their belongings were pitifully few: some clothes, a hairbrush, a small wooden horse that had been Emma's father's last gift to her, and Sarah's wedding ring, which she kept on a string around her neck, hidden beneath her dress. They found Gabriel already in the kitchen, coffee brewing on the stove and a fire crackling in the hearth. "Good morning," he said, looking up from the table where he was mending a bridle. "I hope you slept well." "We did. Thank you," Sarah replied, self-consciously smoothing her hair. "I'd like to prepare breakfast, if you'll show me where things are kept." Gabriel set aside his work. "Of course, but there's no rush." "Coffee." Sarah accepted the cup he offered, the warm ceramic soothing against her palms. As she sipped the strong brew, Gabriel showed her the pantry. explaining his simple system of organization and pointing out the root cellar accessible through a trapdoor in the floor. "I've been managing on my own," he said, "but I'm no cook. Beans and bacon get tiresome after a while." Sarah nodded, already taking mental inventory of the supplies and planning meals. This, at least, was familiar territory. "I'll have something proper ready soon." While she worked at the stove, frying bacon and mixing batter for biscuits, Gabriel sat at the table with Emma, whittling a small piece of wood. The little girl watched, fascinated, as shavings curled away from his knife. "What are you making?" she asked, her natural curiosity overcoming her shyness. Gabriel smiled, and Sarah was struck by how the expression transformed his serious face. "A little horse. Would you like to have it when it's done?" Emma nodded eagerly, and Sarah felt a surge of gratitude for his kindness toward her daughter. Breakfast was a simple affair, but Gabriel's appreciation for the hot biscuits and properly cooked bacon was evident. After they'd eaten, he explained the routine of the ranch: the cattle that needed tending, the vegetable garden that supplied much of their food, the chickens that provided eggs and occasional meat. "I usually have a hired hand to help with the cattle," he explained, "but Jim took sick last month and headed back east to his family. I've been managing alone, which is why the house needs attention." Sarah nodded, understanding now why he had been at the auction. "I'll see to the house and meals. And the garden too, if you like. I grew up on a farm before I married." "That would be helpful," Gabriel said. "And your daughter Emma, isn't it? She's welcome to play anywhere near the house. Just keep away from the corral where the new horses are. They're still being broken." With that, he headed out to begin his day's work, leaving Sarah to explore the house more thoroughly. It was clean enough, but needed a woman's touch. The curtains were dusty, the corners needed sweeping, and the pantry could use reorganization. She set to work with a will, finding purpose in the familiar tasks. Emma helped as much as a 3-year-old could, carrying small items and chattering happily about the chickens she could see from the kitchen window. By midday, Sarah had made significant progress. The main rooms were thoroughly cleaned, and a stew was simmering on the stove for the evening meal. When Gabriel returned for the noon dinner, he paused in the doorway, looking around with appreciation. "You've been busy," he said, removing his hat and hanging it on a peg by the door. "The place hasn't looked this good since." "Well, ever." Sarah felt a small glow of pride. "It's a fine house. It just needed some attention." They settled into a routine over the next few days. Sarah rose early to prepare breakfast, then spent her days cleaning, cooking, and tending to the garden while Emma played nearby. Gabriel worked from dawn till dusk with the cattle and horses, stopping briefly for meals. In the evenings, he would sometimes read by the fire while Sarah mended clothes or taught Emma her letters. They spoke little at first, the situation too new and uncertain for easy conversation. But Sarah observed Gabriel carefully, noting his gentle handling of animals, his patience with Emma's endless questions, the way he always removed his boots at the door to keep from tracking dirt on floors she had just swept. A week after their arrival, Sarah was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard Emma's delighted laughter. Looking up, she saw Gabriel had lifted the little girl onto the back of a docile old mare, his hands steady on her waist as he led the horse in a slow circle. "Look, Mama, I'm riding," Emma called out, her face alight with joy. "I see you, sweetheart. Hold on tight," Sarah replied, unable to suppress a smile at her daughter's excitement. Gabriel glanced over, catching Sarah's eye. "Hope you don't mind. She's been watching me with the horses all week. Thought she might like to try." "I don't mind," Sarah said, surprised to realize it was true. She trusted him with her daughter, a realization that both comforted and unsettled her. That evening, after Emma had fallen asleep, Sarah found Gabriel on the porch, smoking a pipe and gazing at the stars. She hesitated in the doorway, but he noticed her presence and gestured to the empty chair beside him. "Beautiful night," he commented as she sat down, wrapping her shawl tightly around her shoulders against the cool air. "It is," she agreed, looking up at the vast expanse of stars, so much brighter here than they had been in town. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the distant lowing of cattle and the chirping of crickets. "Mr. Reed," Sarah began, then faltered, unsure how to express what she wanted to say. "Gabriel," he corrected gently. "After sharing a home for a week, I think we can use first names," don't you? Sarah nodded, gathering her courage. Gabriel, then. I wanted to thank you properly for what you did. Buying us, keeping us together. I've seen what happens to women and children who are separated at auction. I can never repay such a debt. Gabriel tapped his pipe against the porch railing, his expression thoughtful. There's no debt, Sarah. What I did, anyone with a conscience would have done the same. But they didn't, she pointed out softly. You did. He was quiet for a long moment. My mother and sister were sold when I was 10, he finally said, his voice low. Different buyers. Never saw either of them again. Sarah's heart clenched at the pain evident in his words. I'm so sorry. It was a long time ago, but when I saw you and Emma on that block. He shook his head. I couldn't let it happen. Not if I could stop it. Understanding dawned on Sarah. You're not originally from the West, are you? No. Born in Kentucky. Came west after the war, looking for a fresh start where a man might be judged by his work rather than his past. Sarah hesitated, then asked the question that had been on her mind. Were you a slave? Gabriel nodded, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Until I was 16. Ran north in 53. Fought with the Union when the war came. His hands, resting on his knees, clenched slightly. Freedom's a precious thing, Sarah. Too precious to be bought and sold. The revelation shifted something in Sarah's understanding of this quiet, dignified man. His actions at the auction took on even deeper meaning, not just kindness, but a profound act of personal justice against a system he had experienced firsthand. Thank you for telling me, she said simply. Gabriel nodded, then changed the subject. Emma's a bright child. You've done well with her, despite your difficulties. Sarah smiled at the mention of her daughter. She's everything to me. After my husband died. She trailed off, the grief still raw. How long were you married? Gabriel asked. 5 years. Thomas was a good man. A dreamer, always planning for a bigger farm, a better life. But the loans he took. She shook her head. When the fever took him, the creditors gave us 3 months of grace before they came for everything, including us. That's no way to treat a widow and child, Gabriel said, anger evident in his tone. The world isn't always kind, Sarah replied, the bitterness of experience in her voice. Gabriel turned to look at her, his expression earnest in the moonlight. No, it isn't. But there are still good people trying to make it better. Remember that. His words stayed with Sarah long after she had bid him good night and returned to the room she shared with Emma. As she lay in bed, listening to her daughter's soft breathing, she found herself wondering about the man whose roof they now lived under. A former slave who had built a life of dignity and independence. A man who had spent a small fortune to save a stranger and her child from suffering a fate he had known too well. For the first time since Thomas's death, Sarah felt the faintest stirring of something beyond grief and fear, a tentative hope that perhaps their future might hold more than mere survival. The weeks passed, and spring turned to summer. The desert heat intensified, but life on the Reed ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. Sarah's duties expanded beyond the house to include helping with the garden, which flourished under her care, and tending to the chickens, whose numbers grew as the hens successfully hatched several clutches of chicks. Emma blossomed in the open spaces of the ranch, her natural exuberance finding outlet in chasing butterflies, helping Sarah gather eggs, and following Gabriel around whenever he worked near the house. To Sarah's relief and gratitude, Gabriel always made time for the little girl, answering her endless questions with patience and teaching her small things about ranch life. One evening in late June, as Sarah was preparing supper, she glanced out the window to see Gabriel showing Emma how to feed a motherless lamb from a bottle. The sight of her daughter's delighted face and Gabriel's gentle instruction brought an unexpected lump to Sarah's throat. Thomas had been a devoted father, but his focus had always been on the future, the better life he was building. Gabriel, by contrast, seemed present in each moment with Emma, finding joy in her discoveries rather than merely tolerating her childish interests. The realization unsettled Sarah. She was beginning to care for Gabriel in a way that went beyond gratitude, and the feeling frightened her. Her position was precarious legally. She was his property, living under his roof at his discretion. And while he had never treated her as anything less than an equal, the reality of their situation couldn't be ignored. Gabriel looked up then, catching her watching them. He smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes, and Sarah felt her heart quicken. She turned quickly back to her cooking, trying to ignore the warmth that had spread through her chest. That night, after Emma was asleep, Gabriel surprised Sarah by asking if she would join him for a walk. "The night air's cooler," he explained, "and there's a full moon. Good for walking." Curious, Sarah agreed, checking that Emma was soundly asleep before following Gabriel out into the moonlit yard. They walked in companionable silence for a while, following a path that led away from the house toward a small rise overlooking the property. "I come here sometimes to think," Gabriel said as they reached the top of the rise. "Best view of the ranch." In the silver moonlight, the ranch spread out below them, the house and barn, the corrals and fields, all peaceful under the star-filled sky. In the distance, the silhouettes of mountains rose against the horizon. "It's beautiful," Sarah said softly. Gabriel nodded, his expression thoughtful. "When I first came here, this land was nothing but scrub and rock. Took years of work to make it what it is now." He glanced at her, but something was still missing. Sarah met his gaze, her heart beating faster at the intensity in his eyes. "Life is meant to be shared, Sarah. A home should have family in it." Gabriel's voice was low, earnest. "These past weeks, with you and Emma here, the ranch has felt like a real home for the first time." Sarah looked away, overwhelmed by the emotion his words stirred in her. "We're grateful for your kindness, Gabriel. You've given us safety when we had none." Gabriel shook his head. "It's more than that. You've brought life back to this place. And to me." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded document, offering it to her. Sarah took it with trembling hands, unfolding it in the moonlight. "What is this?" she asked, though the official stamp at the top gave her a clue. "Your freedom papers," Gabriel said quietly. "And Emma's. I filed them in town last week. According to the law, you're no longer bound to me or this property. You're free to go wherever you choose." Sarah stared at the document, her vision blurring with sudden tears. Freedom. After months of being considered property, of having her fate decided by others, she was free again. She and Emma both. "Why?" she whispered, looking up at Gabriel's face. His expression was solemn, vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. "Because I want you to stay by choice, not obligation. Because whatever grows between us should be freely given, not taken or owed." The meaning behind his words was clear, and Sarah felt both fear and hope rise within her. "Gabriel, you don't need to say anything now," he interrupted gently. "You have time to decide what you want. If you choose to leave, I'll help you get established wherever you wish to go. If you stay—" He paused, his voice dropping lower. "If you stay, it would be as equals. Partners in this life, if that's what you want to." Sarah looked down at the papers in her hands, then back at the man standing before her, a man who had shown her nothing but respect and kindness, who had given her daughter laughter again, who had now given her the most precious gift of all, choice. "I need time," she said honestly. "This is unexpected." Gabriel nodded, no disappointment visible in his expression. "Take all the time you need. Nothing changes unless you want it to." They walked back to the house in silence, but it was a comfortable quiet, filled with new possibilities rather than constraints. At the door to her room, Gabriel bid her good night with a gentle smile that stayed with Sarah long after she had slipped into bed beside Emma. Freedom. The word echoed in her mind as she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She could take Emma and start fresh somewhere else, perhaps in California, where she had heard opportunities were plentiful. Or she could stay here, on this ranch that was beginning to feel like home, with a man whose quiet strength and kindness had slowly worked their way into her heart. The choice was hers. For the first time in too long, the future was hers to shape. Morning found Sarah still undecided but determined to continue her duties while she considered her options. She rose early as usual and prepared breakfast, her mind working through possibilities as she moved around the familiar kitchen. When Gabriel came in from the morning chores, he greeted her with the same respectful warmth he always showed, giving no indication that anything had changed between them. Sarah appreciated his restraint, the way he was giving her space to think without pressure. After breakfast, as Gabriel prepared to ride out to check on the herd, he mentioned casually, "I'll be heading into town tomorrow for supplies. You're welcome to come along if you'd like. Might do you and Emma good to have a change of scenery." Sarah considered the offer. She hadn't left the ranch since arriving, and the prospect of seeing the town not as property being auctioned, but as a free woman held appeal. Thank you. We'd like that. Gabriel nodded, seeming pleased. We'll leave after breakfast, then. The next morning, Sarah dressed Emma in her best dress and took extra care with her own appearance, pinning her hair neatly and choosing the blue dress that Gabriel had purchased for her from a catalog a few weeks earlier. It was a simple garment, but well made, with a fitted bodice and full skirt that made her feel more like herself than she had in months. Gabriel's appreciative glance when she emerged from her room sent a flutter through Sarah's stomach. You look lovely, he said simply, then turned his attention to helping Emma into the wagon. The ride to town was pleasant, with Emma chattering excitedly about everything they passed. It was the farthest the child had been from the ranch since their arrival, and her enthusiasm was contagious. Willow Creek had grown since Sarah had last seen it. New buildings lined the main street, and the sound of construction echoed from the edge of town where a new hotel was being built. Gabriel pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the general store. I need to see to some business at the bank, he told Sarah, helping her and Emma down from the wagon. Would you like to handle the shopping while I'm there? Or we could go together after. I can manage the shopping, Sarah said, grateful for the trust he showed in her. In her previous life, she had often handled such errands for her household, but being able to do so again, as a free woman, meant more than Gabriel probably realized. He handed her a list and a small purse of money. Get whatever else you think we need. I'll meet you back here in an hour or so. As Gabriel walked toward the bank, Sarah took Emma's hand and entered the general store. The shopkeeper, a portly man with spectacles, greeted them warmly. Mrs. Mason, isn't it? Haven't seen you since the auction. You're looking well. Sarah tensed slightly at the reminder, but nodded politely. Yes, thank you. I'm here for supplies for the Reed Ranch. The shopkeeper's eyebrows rose. Reed's place? He finally hired some help, did he? About time. Man can't run a spread like that alone, especially not since he cut himself off, busying himself with arranging items on the counter. Curious about the unfinished comment, Sarah began selecting items from Gabriel's list: coffee, sugar, flour, and other staples. As she shopped, she became aware of curious glances from other customers, along with whispered comments. A well-dressed woman approached her as she was examining fabric for new curtains. You're living at the Reed Ranch? She asked without preamble. Sarah nodded, uncomfortable with the woman's scrutiny. Yes, my daughter and I both. The woman's gaze shifted to Emma, who was admiring a display of candy. Brave of you, she said in a low voice. After what happened to his wife, Sarah's heart seemed to stop. His wife? The woman's eyes widened. Oh my, you didn't know? It was 3 years ago now. Terrible tragedy. Indian raid while he was in town. Found her. She lowered her voice further. Well, it wasn't pretty. Their baby too. Not even a year old. Sarah felt as though the floor had dropped from beneath her feet. Gabriel had been married, had a child, had lost them both violently, and he had never mentioned it, not once in all their conversations. I'm sorry, she managed to say. I didn't know. The woman patted her arm. Well, I suppose it's not something a man likes to discuss. He took it hard, they say, kept to himself after, though he was friendly enough before. Good man, Reed. Just damaged, I suppose you'd say. As the woman moved away, Sarah completed her shopping in a daze, her mind reeling with this new information. It explained so much: Gabriel's solitary nature, the unused room in the house that he never entered, the sadness she sometimes glimpsed in his eyes when he watched Emma play. When she met Gabriel outside the store an hour later, she found it difficult to look at him without seeing the weight of his past written across his features. How had she not recognized the signs of grief that she herself knew so intimately? Gabriel loaded their purchases into the wagon, commenting on the good price Sarah had negotiated for the flour, seemingly unaware of her inner turmoil. It wasn't until they were on the road back to the ranch that he noticed her unusual quiet. Is everything all right? He asked, glancing at her with concern. Sarah hesitated, uncertain whether to confront him about what she had learned. Emma was dozing between them, worn out from the excitement of the trip. I heard something in town, she finally said, keeping her voice low. About your past. Gabriel's hands tightened on the reins, but his expression remained neutral. People talk. What did you hear? That you had a wife. And a child. Sarah watched his profile carefully. That they died in an attack. For a long moment, Gabriel said nothing, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. When he finally spoke, his voice was strained. Yes. Rebecca was my wife. Our son, Adam, was 8 months old. I'm so sorry, Gabriel, Sarah said softly. Why didn't you tell me? He sighed, a sound filled with old pain. At first, it didn't seem relevant to our arrangement. Later, he shook his head. Later, I should have told you. Especially after last night. You deserve to know. What happened? Sarah asked gently. Gabriel was silent for so long that Sarah thought he might not answer. Then, in a low voice, he began to speak. I was in town, selling cattle. Rebecca and Adam were at the ranch with Jim, the hand I mentioned. A small band of Apache, renegades from their tribe, came looking for horses and supplies. Jim was killed trying to protect them. When I got back, his voice broke. The house had been burned. They were both gone. Sarah reached out instinctively, touching his arm. Gabriel, I can't imagine. I rebuilt the house, he continued, as if needing to get the words out now that he had started. Couldn't leave the land, it was all I had left of them. But the house was empty. Just a place to sleep, not a home. Until you and Emma came. The simple statement held such weight that Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. She understood now what he had meant on the hill, about the ranch feeling like a home again. Is that why you were at the auction? She asked quietly. Looking for someone to fill the emptiness. Gabriel shook his head firmly. No, I went for supplies. Wasn't planning on bidding on anything but tools. His expression softened as he glanced at her. Then I saw you holding Emma, looking so fierce and frightened at once. Saw that mining owner eyeing you, knowing he'd separate you. And something woke up in me that had been sleeping a long time. The honesty in his words touched Sarah deeply. This was not a man looking to replace what he had lost, but one who had recognized a kindred spirit in pain and had acted from compassion. Thank you for telling me, she said simply. Gabriel nodded, his shoulders seeming to relax slightly now that the truth was out. I should have told you sooner. Wasn't fair to keep it from you, especially when asking you to consider staying. They rode in silence for a while, each absorbed in their own thoughts. As the ranch came into view, Gabriel spoke again, his voice steady. Nothing changes what I said last night, Sarah. You and Emma are free to choose your path. If knowing about Rebecca and Adam affects your decision, I understand. But I want you to know that what I feel for you, it's not about replacing what I lost. It's about finding something new. Something unexpected, but no less real. Sarah looked at him then, seeing the truth in his eyes. The past had shaped him, as her own past had shaped her, but it didn't define all that he was or all that they might become together. I need a little more time, she said honestly. But knowing the truth. It helps, Gabriel. Thank you. He nodded, and as they pulled up to the house, Sarah felt a strange sense of homecoming, not just to the physical place, but to a deeper understanding of the man whose life had become intertwined with her own. That evening, after Emma was asleep, Sarah sat on the porch watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The freedom papers Gabriel had given her were folded in her pocket, a tangible reminder of the choice before her. Stay or go. Build a new life here with Gabriel, or forge a path elsewhere for herself and Emma. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the door opening. Gabriel stepped out onto the porch, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He offered one to Sarah, who accepted it with a smile. Mind if I join you? He asked. It's your porch, she replied lightly. Gabriel sat in the chair beside her, his expression thoughtful as he gazed out at the night. Been thinking about what you learned today? About Rebecca and Adam. Sarah turned to look at him, noting the way the lamplight from the window outlined his strong profile. What about them? I love them, he said simply. Always will. But grief. It changes over time. Becomes something you carry rather than something that carries you. He met her gaze. I didn't think I'd ever want to build a life with someone again. Then you and Emma came. And suddenly I could see possibilities I thought were gone forever. The quiet conviction in his voice moved Sarah deeply. She understood the courage it took to open oneself to love after loss. It was a journey she had been on herself since Thomas's death. I was so angry after Thomas died, she admitted. Not just at the creditors who took everything, but at him too. For leaving us vulnerable. For dreaming too big without securing what we already had. She sighed. It wasn't fair of me. He never meant for things to end as they did. Gabriel nodded. Anger's part of grief. Took me a long time to stop being angry at myself for not being here when they needed me. It wasn't your fault, Sarah said firmly. Nor was your situation Thomas's fault, Gabriel replied gently. Life happens as it will. We just do our best with what comes. They sat in companionable silence for a while, sipping their coffee and watching the stars. The night was peaceful, with only the distant sound of cattle and the chirping of crickets disturbing the quiet. I've been thinking about your offer, Sarah said finally. About staying here. Gabriel turned to her, his expression carefully neutral. And Sarah took a deep breath. I'm afraid, she admitted. Not of you, but of trusting again. Of building something that could be lost. Everything in life can be lost, Sarah, Gabriel said softly. That's no reason not to build it in the first place. The simple wisdom of his words resonated with something deep inside her. She had been living in fear since Thomas's death, fear of destitution, fear of separation from Emma, fear of dependency on others. But perhaps courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to move forward despite it. Emma loves it here, she said, a small smile touching her lips. She talks about you all the time. About the animals, the open space, the way you listen to her stories. Gabriel's expression softened. She's a special child. Reminds me that there's wonder in this world, even after hardship. Yes, Sarah agreed. She does that for me too. She turned fully toward him, meeting his gaze directly. If we were to stay, Gabriel, what would that mean? For all of us. Whatever we want it to mean, he replied honestly. We could continue as we are, with you helping on the ranch, raising Emma in a stable home. Or, he hesitated, then pressed on. Or, in time, if feelings grow as I believe they might, we could consider a more permanent arrangement. A true partnership. Marriage, Sarah said, the word both frightening and full of possibility. Gabriel nodded. Eventually, if that's what we both wanted. But there's no rush, Sarah. No pressure. Just the chance to see what might develop between us, day by day. The sincerity in his eyes, the respect in his words, touched something in Sarah that had been closed off since Thomas's death. Here was a man offering not demands or expectations, but possibility, the space to heal, to grow, to perhaps love again. I think, she said slowly, that I would like to stay, to see what might develop between us. The smile that spread across Gabriel's face was like sunrise after a long night, gradual, warm, illuminating. I'm glad, he said simply. Sarah returned his smile, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. The decision wasn't without risk. Opening her heart again meant vulnerability, but it also meant hope. And after so many months of merely surviving, hope felt like the most precious gift imaginable. As if to seal the moment, Gabriel reached across the space between them and gently took her hand in his. His palm was warm and calloused from work, his touch respectful but intimate. Sarah didn't pull away, instead letting her fingers curl around his in acceptance of the connection forming between them. They sat that way for a long time, hands linked, watching the stars wheel overhead in the vast desert sky. It wasn't a declaration of love, it was too soon for that, but it was a beginning. A choice made freely to walk forward together and see where the path might lead. Summer turned to fall, bringing cooler temperatures and subtle changes to the desert landscape. Life on the Reed Ranch continued its steady rhythm, but with a new undercurrent of growing connection between Sarah and Gabriel. They moved carefully, respectfully, building trust through small moments, shared morning coffee before Emma woke, evenings on the porch discussing the day's events, Gabriel teaching Sarah to ride the gentle mare he had set aside for her use. Their conversations deepened, revealing more of themselves to each other with each passing day. Sarah learned that Gabriel had taught himself to read during his years as a slave, hiding the dangerous skill from his masters. After gaining his freedom, he had devoured books whenever he could find them, educating himself through reading and observation. His intelligence and thoughtfulness continually impressed her, as did his unfailing kindness toward Emma. For his part, Gabriel discovered Sarah's strength and resilience, her quick mind and practical nature. He admired the way she had maintained her dignity through hardship, the fierce love she showed for her daughter, and her willingness to rebuild her life from the ashes of loss. Emma thrived in their care, blossoming from a quiet, frightened child into a joyful, curious little girl who delighted in helping with small chores and exploring the ranch under their watchful eyes. She had taken to calling Gabriel Mr. Gabe, a name he responded to with evident pleasure. One crisp October evening, as they sat by the fire after Emma had gone to bed, Gabriel surprised Sarah with a question. "Would you and Emma like to come with me to the Harvest Festival in town next week? The whole county gathers for dancing, food, games for the children. Thought it might be nice for us to go together." Sarah looked up from her mending, touched by the invitation. It would be their first public appearance as whatever they were becoming to each other. "I'd like that," she said. "Emma would be thrilled." Gabriel smiled, the firelight casting warm shadows across his face. "Good. It's been years since I attended myself. Never seemed worth the effort alone." The simple admission revealed much about his solitary years after losing his family. Sarah set aside her sewing and moved to sit beside him on the sofa, a closeness that had become more natural between them in recent weeks. "Thank you for asking us," she said softly. Gabriel's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining with familiar ease. "Thank you for saying yes." The day of the Harvest Festival dawned clear and cool. Sarah dressed Emma in her best dress, which she had carefully altered to accommodate the child's growth, and tied ribbons in her dark curls. For herself, she chose the blue dress that Gabriel had first purchased for her, now embellished with lace collar and cuffs she had added herself. When she emerged from their room with Emma, Gabriel was waiting in the main room, dressed in clean dark trousers, a white shirt, and a vest she had never seen before. His hair was neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. He looked handsome and somehow younger, the usual lines of concentration around his eyes softened by his smile when he saw them. "You both look beautiful," he said, his gaze lingering on Sarah in a way that brought warmth to her cheeks. "As do you," she replied, pleased by the flash of surprise and pleasure in his eyes at the compliment. The ride to town was filled with Emma's excited chatter about what she hoped to see at the festival. As they approached Willow Creek, they could hear music and laughter drifting from the town square, where colorful bunting and lanterns had been strung between buildings. Gabriel helped them down from the wagon, then offered Sarah his arm. After a moment's hesitation, she took it, conscious of the statement they were making but finding she didn't mind. Emma skipped ahead of them, her eyes wide at the sights and sounds of the festival. Their entrance did not go unnoticed. Sarah was aware of curious glances and whispered comments as they made their way through the crowd. But Gabriel's steady presence beside her and Emma's obvious happiness made it easier to ignore the scrutiny. They visited the various booths and games, Gabriel purchasing treats for Emma and insisting that Sarah choose a lovely hand-knitted shawl from one of the craft tables. They watched the children's sack races, cheering as Emma participated, coming in third and beaming with pride as Gabriel lifted her onto his shoulders afterward. As evening approached, lanterns were lit around the square, and musicians set up on a small platform. Couples began to gather for dancing, and Gabriel turned to Sarah with a questioning look. "Would you care to dance?" he asked, his voice carrying a hint of uncertainty that she found endearing. Sarah hesitated. She hadn't danced since before Thomas's death, and the prospect was both appealing and intimidating. "What about Emma? Mrs. Johnson from the bakery has organized games for the children," Gabriel said, nodding toward where several youngsters were already gathering. "Emma would be welcome." After ensuring Emma was happily engaged with the other children, Sarah allowed Gabriel to lead her to the area cleared for dancing. The musicians struck up a lively tune, and Gabriel's hand settled respectfully at her waist, the other holding hers as they joined the other couples. "I should warn you," Sarah said as they began to move. "It's been some time since I danced." Gabriel smiled down at her. "You're doing fine. Just follow my lead." To Sarah's surprise, Gabriel was an accomplished dancer, guiding her smoothly through the steps with a confidence that made it easy to follow him. As they moved together to the music, Sarah felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years, a simple joy in movement, in connection, in being seen not as a widow or a possession, but as a woman enjoying a dance with a man who clearly admired her. "Where did you learn to dance so well?" she asked as they circled the floor. A hint of sadness crossed Gabriel's features. "Rebecca taught me." She loved dancing. Instead of feeling jealous or uncomfortable at the mention of his late wife, Sarah felt a rush of gratitude toward the woman who had shaped part of the man Gabriel had become. "She taught you well," she said softly. Gabriel's eyes held hers, appreciation evident in his gaze. "Thank you for understanding," he said simply. As the evening progressed, they danced several more times, ate at the communal tables set up with food contributed by families throughout the county, and watched a display of fireworks that left Emma wide-eyed with wonder. Throughout it all, Gabriel remained attentive and considerate, treating Sarah with a respect that did not go unnoticed by the townspeople. By the time they headed home, Emma was asleep in Gabriel's arms, worn out from excitement and activity. He placed her gently in the wagon, then helped Sarah up beside her. As they drove through the moonlit desert toward home, a comfortable silence settled between them. "Thank you for today," Sarah said finally. It was wonderful to see Emma so happy. Gabriel glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "And you? Were you happy too?" The simple question touched her deeply. How long had it been since someone had been concerned with her happiness? "Yes," she said honestly. "Very much so." Gabriel's smile was visible even in the dim light. "Good. That's good." When they arrived home, Gabriel carried the still sleeping Emma to her bed while Sarah lit the lamps in the main room. When he returned, he found her standing by the window, looking out at the starlit landscape. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, coming to stand beside her. Sarah turned to him, her heart full of emotions she was only beginning to understand. "I was thinking about choices, about how sometimes the hardest moments in our lives can lead to unexpected blessings." Gabriel's expression grew serious. "Like the auction block leading you here?" Sarah nodded. "If Thomas hadn't died, if I hadn't been sold, I never would have known this place. Or you." She looked up at him, allowing her feelings to show in her eyes. "And knowing you, Gabriel Reed, has been a blessing I never expected." For a moment, Gabriel seemed unable to speak, his emotions too close to the surface. Then, with infinite gentleness, he reached out to touch her cheek. "Sarah," he said, her name a question and a prayer. She leaned into his touch, giving him the answer he sought. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Gabriel lowered his head and brushed his lips against hers, a kiss so tender and respectful that tears sprang to Sarah's eyes. When he drew back, his gaze searching hers, Sarah found herself smiling through those tears. "That was nice," she whispered. Gabriel's answering smile was radiant. "Yes," he agreed. "It was." He didn't push for more, instead taking her hand and raising it to his lips. "Good night, Sarah. Sweet dreams." As Sarah prepared for bed that night, her lips still tingling from Gabriel's kiss, she realized that something fundamental had shifted between them. What had begun as an arrangement of necessity, then grown into friendship and mutual respect, was blossoming into something deeper, something that, if nurtured carefully, might one day be called love. The thought was both exhilarating and frightening. But as she drifted off to sleep, Sarah found herself looking forward to tomorrow and all the tomorrows after, with a hope that had once seemed lost forever. Winter came early that year, bringing cold winds and occasional frost to the desert. The work on the ranch changed with the season. Gabriel spent more time repairing equipment and structures, while Sarah focused on preserving food and making the house as warm and comfortable as possible. As Christmas approached, Sarah noticed Gabriel becoming quieter, more withdrawn. Recognizing the signs of grief that she knew from her own experience, she gave him space while ensuring he wasn't alone for too long with his thoughts. One evening, after Emma had gone to bed, Sarah found Gabriel sitting by the fire, staring into the flames with a photograph in his hands. She sat beside him quietly, offering her presence without demands. After a while, Gabriel spoke without looking up. Christmas was Rebecca's favorite time of year. She would decorate everything, make special treats, sing carols all day long. He handed Sarah the photograph, a daguerreotype of a smiling young woman holding an infant. This was taken just before. Sarah studied the image with gentle reverence. Rebecca had been pretty, with kind eyes and a warm smile. The baby, Adam, was plump and bright-eyed in his mother's arms. "She looks like she was full of joy," Sarah said softly, handing the photograph back. Gabriel nodded, carefully returning it to the small box he kept on the mantel. She was. Even in hard times, she found reasons to be happy. He sighed. Haven't celebrated Christmas properly since losing them. Didn't see the point. Sarah placed her hand on his arm. Would you like to celebrate this year? For Emma's sake? And perhaps. She hesitated. Perhaps for Rebecca and Adam too. To honor their memory by finding joy again. Gabriel looked at her then, his eyes reflecting both pain and gratitude. You're a remarkable woman, Sarah Mason. Yes, I think I would like that. In the days that followed, Sarah and Emma set about preparing for Christmas with enthusiasm that gradually drew Gabriel out of his melancholy. They gathered evergreen boughs to decorate the house, strung popcorn and berries for the small tree Gabriel brought in, and baked cookies from Sarah's mother's recipe that filled the house with the scent of cinnamon and ginger. Gabriel contributed by crafting small wooden toys for Emma, a doll with movable arms and legs, a miniature wagon that really rolled, a set of animals for a toy farm. Sarah, working secretly after Emma was asleep, sewed a warm scarf for Gabriel and helped Emma make a drawing of the three of them to give him. On Christmas Eve, after a special dinner of roast rabbit and sweet potatoes, they gathered by the fire to exchange gifts. Emma's delight at her toys brought smiles to both adults' faces, and Gabriel's evident pleasure at their modest gifts to him warmed Sarah's heart. When Emma had finally been convinced to go to bed, with promises that Christmas Day would bring even more joy, Gabriel disappeared briefly into his room. He returned with a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. For you, he said, sitting beside Sarah on the sofa. Merry Christmas. Sarah untied the string carefully and opened the package to find a small wooden box, beautifully carved with a pattern of desert flowers. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, was a silver locket on a delicate chain. Gabriel, she breathed, lifting it out carefully. It's beautiful. Open it, he urged softly. Inside the locket was a tiny, perfect sketch of Emma's face on one side. The other side was empty. I thought, Gabriel said, a hint of uncertainty in his voice, that perhaps someday you might want to put another picture there, of someone else important to you. The implication was clear, and Sarah felt her heart swell with emotion. Help me put it on, she asked, holding out the necklace. Gabriel took it from her hands, and Sarah turned, lifting her hair so he could fasten the chain around her neck. His fingers were gentle against her skin, lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary. When she turned back to face him, his expression was tender, vulnerable in a way that made her breath catch. Thank you, she said softly. It's the most thoughtful gift I've ever received. Gabriel reached out to touch the locket where it rested just below her collarbone. It looks right on you, he said, his voice low. Sarah covered his hand with her own, holding it against her heart. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken feelings and growing certainty. Sarah, Gabriel began, his voice catching slightly. These past months with you and Emma, you've brought life back to this house. Back to me. You've done the same for us, Sarah replied, her eyes never leaving his. Given us safety, respect, a home. Gabriel shook his head slightly. It's more than that. You must know that by now. Sarah nodded, her heart racing. Yes, for me too. With infinite gentleness, Gabriel leaned forward and kissed her. Unlike their first kiss, which had been brief and tentative, this one deepened as Sarah responded, her hand rising to touch his face, to feel the warmth of his skin beneath her fingertips. When they finally drew apart, Gabriel rested his forehead against hers, his breathing uneven. I love you, Sarah, he whispered. I didn't think I'd ever say those words to anyone again, but I love you. Tears filled Sarah's eyes at the simple declaration. I love you too, she replied, the words feeling both momentous and natural, as if they had always been true and were only now being acknowledged. Gabriel drew her into his arms, holding her close as if she were infinitely precious. Sarah rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, feeling safer and more cherished than she had in longer than she could remember. They sat that way for a long time, talking softly about their feelings, about the future they might build together, about Emma, and what these changes would mean for her. It was well past midnight when Gabriel finally walked Sarah to her door, kissing her once more before bidding her good night. As Sarah prepared for bed, her fingers traced the outline of the locket at her throat. A year ago, she had been a grieving widow facing destitution. 6 months ago, she had stood on an auction block, terrified for her daughter's future. Now, on Christmas Eve, she was a woman in love, looking forward to building a life with a man who respected her strength, valued her independence, and cherished her heart. The journey had been painful, the losses real and deep. But as she drifted off to sleep, Sarah found herself grateful for the path that had led her here to this house, to this man, to this unexpected second chance at happiness. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold, with a rare dusting of frost covering the desert landscape. Sarah woke to Emma's excited voice, calling her to come see what Santa had brought. With a smile, she rose and followed her daughter to the main room, where Gabriel was already stoking the fire to warm the house. The day passed in a haze of happiness, a special breakfast, more small gifts for Emma that Gabriel had hidden, a walk in the crisp air to see how the frost had transformed the desert into a glittering wonderland. Throughout it all, the new understanding between Sarah and Gabriel added a layer of joy that made everything seem brighter, more meaningful. That evening, after Emma had fallen asleep surrounded by her new treasures, Gabriel asked Sarah to join him on the porch. Despite the cold, they wrapped themselves in blankets and sat close together, watching the stars emerge in the clear winter sky. "I've been thinking," Gabriel said, his arm around Sarah's shoulders keeping her warm against the chill. "About us. About the future." Sarah looked up at him, her heart full. "What about it?" Gabriel's expression was earnest in the moonlight. "I want to do this right, Sarah. No rushing, no pressure. You've been through so much, and I want to be sure you have time to be certain about what you want." Sarah smiled, touched by his consideration. "I appreciate that. But I am certain about you, Gabriel. About us." "Even so," he said, taking her hand in his. "I think we should take our time. Court properly. Let Emma adjust to the idea of us as a family before we make it official." "Court," Sarah repeated, amused by the old-fashioned term. Gabriel smiled, a hint of self-consciousness in his expression. "Yes, court. Spend time together, learn each other's ways, build something solid before we talk of marriage." His eyes held hers. "Because that's where I hope we're heading, Sarah. If you'll have me, someday I want to make you my wife. Legally, properly, with all the respect and honor you deserve." The simple dignity of his words moved Sarah deeply. This was a man who understood the value of choice, of consent freely given, of relationships built on mutual respect rather than ownership or obligation. "I would like that," she said softly. "To court. And yes, Gabriel, someday I would be honored to be your wife." The joy that spread across his features was like sunrise, gradual and illuminating. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm that held both promise and restraint. "Then we'll court," he said, his voice warm with happiness. "And when the time is right, we'll build our future together. All three of us." As they sat beneath the winter stars, hands linked and hearts aligned, Sarah felt a sense of rightness, of completion, that she had feared lost forever. The path ahead might not always be smooth, life seldom was, but she was no longer walking it alone. She had found not just shelter, but love, not just security, but partnership, not just a house, but a home. In the months that followed, Gabriel courted Sarah with a mixture of old-fashioned gallantry and practical partnership that suited them both. He brought her wildflowers from his rides around the property, carved small tokens for her from wood, and ordered books he thought she might enjoy from the catalog. But more meaningful than these gifts were the daily kindnesses, the way he sought her opinion on ranch decisions, his unwavering respect for her independence, his genuine interest in her thoughts and feelings. For her part, Sarah blossomed under his attention, regaining confidence that had been eroded by hardship and loss. She took increasing responsibility for aspects of the ranch business, keeping accounts and suggesting improvements that Gabriel implemented with appreciation for her practical mind. Together, they made a formidable team, their different strengths complementing each other perfectly. Emma thrived in the atmosphere of growing love and stability. She followed Gabriel around the ranch whenever possible, soaking up his knowledge of animals and land with eager curiosity. He taught her to ride her own pony, a gentle creature he had specifically trained for her, and began simple lessons in reading and arithmetic in the evenings by the fire. Sarah watched their bond deepen with grateful joy. Emma had been too young when Thomas died to truly remember her father, but in Gabriel, she had found a steady, loving male presence who nurtured her confidence and encouraged her spirit. Their relationship was a daily gift that Sarah treasured almost as much as her own growing connection with Gabriel. Spring arrived, bringing new life to the desert and new developments to their small family. One evening in April, as they walked hand in hand along the creek that bordered the property, Gabriel stopped beneath a cottonwood tree just coming into leaf. "I've been thinking," he said, his expression unusually serious, "about making things official between us." Sarah's heart quickened. They had been courting for nearly 4 months now, their love growing stronger and more certain with each passing day. "Oh," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Gabriel smiled, seeing through her attempt at nonchalance. "I promised we'd take our time, and I meant it. But I find myself more certain every day that you're the woman I want to spend my life with." He took both her hands in his. "Would you consider becoming my wife before summer comes? Making this family we've been building official in the eyes of God and the law." Despite having anticipated this moment, Sarah found herself momentarily speechless with emotion. "Yes," she finally managed, her voice thick with unshed tears of joy. "Yes, Gabriel, I would be honored to be your wife." Gabriel's face lit with happiness, and he pulled her into her embrace, lifting her off her feet in his enthusiasm. When he set her down, his expression grew more solemn. "There's something else I want to ask you. About Emma." Sarah looked up at him, curious. "What about her? With your permission, I'd like to legally adopt her as my daughter when we marry. Give her my name. Make her my heir in every sense." His eyes were earnest as they held hers. "I love her as if she were my own blood, Sarah. I want to be her father in truth, not just in daily care." Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks at his words. This man, who had lost so much, was offering not just his heart to Sarah, but his name and protection to her daughter. It was a gift beyond price. "She already loves you like a father," Sarah said softly. "Nothing would make me happier than to make it official." Gabriel's smile was radiant as he pulled her close once more. Then it settled. "We'll be a proper family, the 3 of us." They were married in late May, when the desert was briefly lush with spring growth and wildflowers dotted the landscape with color. The ceremony was small but meaningful, held on the ranch with a circuit-riding preacher officiating and a handful of neighbors and townspeople in attendance. Sarah wore a new dress of soft cream-colored silk that Gabriel had ordered specially from San Francisco, with Emma as her only attendant, proudly scattering flower petals before her mother walked to where Gabriel waited beneath an arch twined with desert blossoms. The vows they exchanged were traditional, but spoken with such evident sincerity that several guests dabbed at their eyes. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Gabriel kissed Sarah with restrained tenderness, mindful of their audience but unable to hide the depth of his feelings. After the ceremony came the adoption, a simple legal proceeding that nevertheless brought fresh tears to Sarah's eyes as Emma solemnly repeated her new full name, Emma Grace Reed. The joy on Gabriel's face as he signed the papers making her legally his daughter was something Sarah knew she would remember all her days. The small reception that followed was festive but informal, with food and music and congratulations from their guests. As the sun began to set, painting the desert in gold and crimson, the last visitors departed, leaving the new family alone. Emma, worn out from excitement and unaccustomed attention, fell asleep almost immediately after being tucked into bed. Sarah kissed her daughter's forehead, adjusting the covers around her small form, her heart full of gratitude for the journey that had brought them to this moment of security and love. When she emerged from Emma's room, Sarah found Gabriel waiting in the hallway, his expression a mixture of tenderness and barely restrained desire that made her heart race. "Mrs. Reed," he said softly, taking her hand and raising it to his lips. "Mr. Reed," she replied, a smile curving her lips at the new title that represented so much more than a simple change of name. With gentle reverence, Gabriel led her to what had been his bedroom, and was now there's a room he had expanded and improved in recent weeks, adding a larger bed, new curtains Sarah had sewn, and a dressing table he had crafted himself as a wedding gift. As the door closed behind them, Gabriel drew Sarah into his arms, all the love and longing of their months together evident in his gaze. "I love you," he whispered against her lips. "My wife, my heart." "And I love you," Sarah replied, her arms twining around his neck. "My husband, my second chance." As moonlight spilled through the curtains, casting silver patterns across the bed, Gabriel and Sarah sealed their vows in the most ancient and intimate way, their bodies and hearts joining as one. In each other's arms, they found healing for old wounds, joy in present connection, and hope for all the days to come. Much later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness, Sarah rested her head on Gabriel's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. His hand stroked gently through her hair, a soothing, possessive touch that made her feel cherished beyond words. "Happy?" he asked softly, his voice rumbling in his chest. Sarah smiled, pressing a kiss to his skin. "Completely. You. More than I ever thought possible again," he admitted, his arms tightening around her. "When I saw you on that auction block, holding Emma so fiercely, I never imagined we'd end up here. That you would become my wife, my partner, my joy." Sarah raised herself on one elbow to look down at his face, silver in the moonlight. "Life takes strange turns," she said thoughtfully. "Sometimes the darkest moments lead to unexpected light." Gabriel reached up to touch her face, his expression solemn. "I'll spend the rest of my days making sure you never regret choosing this life with me." Sarah turned her head to kiss his palm. "And I'll spend mine making sure you know how grateful I am that you found us when we needed you most." As they settled back into each other's arms, sleep beginning to claim them, Sarah thought of all they had endured to reach this moment, the losses, the grief, the fear, the uncertainty. The path had been difficult, but it had led them here, to this bed, this room, this home they were building together. From the edge of sleep, Gabriel murmured, "What are you thinking about?" Sarah smiled in the darkness, nestling closer to his warmth. "That sometimes, when life seems at its darkest, all it takes is finding one pair of kind eyes to change everything." Gabriel's arms tightened around her, a silent acknowledgement of the truth in her words. Together, they drifted into sleep, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them as they had come to face everything together, with love, strength, and unwavering commitment to the family they had built from the ashes of loss and the miracle of second chances. 5 years later, on a warm summer evening, Sarah stood on the porch of the Reed Ranch house, watching as Gabriel taught their son, Thomas Gabriel Reed, to sit on a pony for the first time. At just 3 years old, little Thomas was fearless, his delighted laughter carrying across the yard as the pony took a few gentle steps with Gabriel's hand firmly on the bridle. Beside her, Emma, now 8 and growing into a thoughtful, capable girl with her mother's determination and her adoptive father's quiet strength, leaned against the railing, a book temporarily forgotten in her hands. "He's going to be a fine rider like Papa," Emma observed, pride in her voice for her little brother. Sarah smiled, resting her hand on her daughter's shoulder. "He certainly has no fear. Like someone else I know at that age." Emma grinned up at her mother, then returned her attention to the scene in the yard, where Gabriel was now lifting Thomas from the pony with exaggerated swoops that made the little boy shriek with laughter. As she watched them, Sarah's hand drifted to the locket she still wore every day. It now contained miniature portraits of her children, Emma on one side and Thomas on the other. The simple piece of jewelry had come to symbolize the journey from that terrible day on the auction block to this moment of abundant happiness. The ranch had prospered under their joint care, expanding to include more cattle, better horses, and improved facilities. Gabriel's reputation as a fair employer and honest businessman had grown throughout the county, bringing opportunities that had allowed them to build a more comfortable life. The house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family, with a new bedroom for Emma, a nursery for Thomas, and even a small study where Gabriel and Sarah handled ranch business together. But more meaningful than material success was the deep, abiding love that had grown between them. What had begun as desperate gratitude on Sarah's part and compassionate attraction on Gabriel's had matured into a partnership of equals, a marriage founded on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine affection that had only deepened with time and trials. They had weathered challenges together, drought years that threatened the herd, illness that had swept through the region, claiming neighbors and friends, the normal conflicts that arose between two strong-willed individuals building a life together. Through it all, they had maintained the commitment made on their wedding day to face whatever came as one, drawing strength from each other and from the family they cherished. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard, Gabriel scooped Thomas into his arms and walked toward the house, his smile widening as he caught sight of Sarah watching them. "Mama," Thomas called, waving frantically. "I rode the pony all by myself." "I saw, sweetheart," Sarah called back, her heart full at the joy on her son's face. "You were very brave." Gabriel climbed the porch steps, settling Thomas on his hip as he leaned in to kiss Sarah's cheek. "He's a natural," he said proudly, "just like his big sister was." Emma beamed at the compliment, closing her book and tucking it under her arm. "Can I help get supper ready, Mama?" "Of course," Sarah replied, smoothing her daughter's hair. "Why don't you set the table while I finish the stew?" As Emma went inside, Gabriel shifted Thomas to his other arm, his free hand reaching out to touch Sarah's face with gentle familiarity. "Good day?" he asked, the simple question encompassing so much more than the words themselves. Sarah leaned into his touch, smiling up at him. "The best kind. Quiet, productive, ending with the people I love most all in one place." Gabriel's eyes, still as kind and warm as they had been that first day in Willow Creek, held hers with understanding. "I was thinking earlier about how much has changed since you and Emma came into my life. How empty the place was before you, how full it is now." Sarah nodded, knowing exactly what he meant. "From that first day, when you brought us here from the auction, something about this place felt right. Even when I was still afraid, still uncertain. There was something about you, about this land, that spoke to me of home." Gabriel's smile deepened. "It wasn't really home until you were here. Just a place I existed." He looked around at the ranch, at the house they had made together, at the child in his arms who represented their shared future. "Now it's everything I ever dreamed of having." Thomas, growing restless, squirmed to be put down. "Hungry, Papa," he announced with the directness of a 3-year-old. Gabriel chuckled, setting the boy on his feet. "Go find your sister, then. Tell her Papa says it's almost supper time." As Thomas scampered into the house, Gabriel turned back to Sarah, drawing her into his arms. "5 years," he said softly. "5 years since you became my wife, and I still wake up every morning grateful that you chose to stay." Sarah's arms slipped around his waist, her head resting against his chest in the familiar gesture that still brought her comfort and joy. "Best choice I ever made," she murmured. "For myself, for Emma, for the family we've built." Gabriel pressed a kiss to the top of her head, then tilted her face up to meet his lips in a tender kiss that held all the passion and promise of their first, tempered now by years of shared life and deepening love. "Come on," Sarah said when they finally parted, taking his hand. "Let's go in. Our children are waiting." Hand in hand, they walked into the house, the home they had created together from the ashes of separate sorrows. As the door closed behind them, the desert twilight settled over the Reed Ranch, wrapping the house in peaceful shadows as another day ended and another began in the ongoing story of a family born from a moment of desperation and a pair of kind eyes that had changed everything.